The International Festival of Arts and Ideas is created and produced on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac, in the land we all call home, Connecticut. We hope that from wherever you are, you take a moment to acknowledge and honor the native people whose land you are on and the history of the place you are in.
The International Festival of Arts and Ideas stands in solidarity with Black and Brown communities and other groups who are targeted and abused by unjust systems of oppression. We support all movements working to decenter white voices and dismantle white supremacy. We are actively seeking to dismantle systemic racism, and we raise our voices with those in our community who are already engaged in this vital work. We commit to working alongside you to create transformative change in New Haven and in our global community.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us for Festival 2022, the Year of Connect. My name is Annie Lin. I'm the Director of Arts at Yale-China, and I serve on the board of this Sower, turning science fiction into opera at the Schubert Theater. And finally, if you have young kids, join me the last weekend of the festival, June 25th through the 26th, on the New Haven Green for the Marble Wall, Jazz on the Green, and so much more. Thank you to the Connecticut Humanities, the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in New York, the David Geffen School of Drama at Yale, and Yale-China for making this program possible. An extra special thanks to the hard-working folks making this Festival 2022 possible. I know there's a lot of people working behind the scenes right now to bring you this great work. So please take a moment right now to think of these efforts and give our festival crew some snaps and love. And now, as you can already see, our guest of honor is on stage. I'd like to introduce the curator and moderator of our program here, who has activated voices throughout his career and the last 6 months in New Haven and brought a community together through his podcast. I'm so pleased to introduce and pass the mic to this year's handsome HKETO Arts Activator, Hollis Ngai. Over to you, Hollis.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, you mentioned about trying to make me laugh, but yeah, that worked. Hey, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. So today's event is about the research that I've been doing for the past few months about my podcast. And so for the past few months, I've been researching on Asian American identities, the American dream, race, and memories. And joining me today, we have two amazing guests, amazing artists. One is Gigi Wong and the other is Annie Tan, both of whom I'll introduce later on in the presentation. So today's presentation will be packed with lots of fun facts, secrets, serious questions, not so serious questions, personal sharings, and snippets from my podcast. And hopefully we'll conclude this to turn into an amazing, meaningful experience for you all. It'll be fast, intricate, and hopefully worthwhile of your time here on this online event. So without further ado, let's start today's presentation. So the passage. This is the name of the podcast that I've been working on for the past 5 months that I've been here. It has been an amazing journey, and I really want to start off with talking about how I kind of come up with this idea of doing a podcast and how it kind of all started in the beginning. And so this is a picture of me when I was, I think, 3 years old. I was like, the king of the swings here. And I grew up in Hong Kong. And I kind of grew up in this kind of like a grassroots environment. I was living in the public housing. I never thought, like, I think 30 years later on, I'll be here in New Haven on the fellowship doing research. And I always thought that I would just, become a kind of an office worker. And something dramatically happened when I turned 10. And so, yeah, this is another picture of me, as you can see. Not so handsome, but this is the best picture I could find. No, this, of course, is David Beckham. And I do share something in common with him. So when I was 10, I kind of had this opportunity to go to the UK. And I spent 8 years there. I was exposed to things like football, food, music, and something that I really liked eating growing up was something called Toad in the Hole. It's a really odd name, but it's basically just batter and sausages. And so it's not as exciting as the name implies. So, but I had a really, really interesting time growing up there. I was the only Cantonese kid in school. Other classmates would often come up to me and ask me to speak in Cantonese and tell them how to say some swear words to teachers. And so that was a really interesting time. And it took me around 2 years to become fluent in English. At the same time, something interesting was happening because I was kind of embracing this new identity of being a foreigner in a new place and also trying to be accepted, try to be included in the community. I have to say, I mean, looking back, it was a really tough time in a way. I met friends, but it was difficult. I encountered, I think, as any foreigners would, there was some difficulties back then. There was some racial abuse. I remember I would often get into arguments with people about things that I believed in, and then when they would, counter argue with me, they would often throw in slurs, mimic my voice, or try to, just to pull up the eyelids. So they were trying to kind of being mean to me, and that experience wasn't kind. I think it kind of created this kind of psychological barrier within me. I was kind of like an outsider for a long time, and it was tough. And I came up to be, I learned, become independent, and I kind of spent the past 5-6 years trying to do arts, trying to help those who are similar kind of been going through the same experiences I had. So I was lucky enough when I got back to Hong Kong. I managed to get in touch with arts, and very soon enough, I became a teacher. And I always thought about my role as an artist and my capability of finding myself in arts, and what does it mean, like who I am, what I can do to make an impact on the society. And I've been doing quite a lot. I've done kind of some drama programs for children from another country studying in Hong Kong, like a drama-based induction program. And here I'm kind of also doing something similar, creating a podcast, hopefully to create a passage for people to have a new understanding or deeper understanding on what it means to be an Asian American in America in the 21st century. I remember when I was in England, the only thing that I really knew about America was this literature I was reading from, and there were two in particular that I remembered quite well. One is called Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller, and the other is called Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Amazing books. And in both the books, it was all very much about the American dream. Rather, it was very much about this disillusionment of American dream. So it was about having this dream, but also understanding there's this kind of realization that such a thing doesn't exist. So that was something at the beginning that really got me curious about, does in right now, this American dream still exist? And carrying on with that, I have two questions. Who is America? What is America? And the thing that I want to to summarize my research and to make it into a meaningful content, I thought about kind of using this digital way to kind of preserve that. And I think for me, working by myself, the best way would be to have a podcast, something that is so well known worldwide, and also that anybody can access anywhere in the world. In fact, the podcast with 2 episodes are already up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. I'll share with you all link later on, and to hopefully you enjoy listening to it. And so to begin with my research with the Asian American identities, I started out with these 4 main sources: books, videos, sounds, and people. And the first book that I ever got in touch at the beginning was a graphic memoir by Malacca. It was called Ours the American Dream. And it was really interesting because in this book, there was a particular chapter on the American dream. And as you can see from this picture here, there's a lot of really interesting drawings on having a fancy house, having a fancy car, and luxurious handbags. And this is what it means to be American. This kind of, maybe it's materialistic, but at the same time, having something so physically, it kind of embraces you to feel the wealth and the happiness. And here is this an interesting snippet from Patrick. Patrick is a friend that I interviewed in one of my episodes. And he has a different understanding towards what an American dream is. So let's listen to the snippet and find out.
I hesitate a little bit because I think the general definition for me is like the rags to riches story. Some starting with nothing, and then finding yourself into the inner circle of wealth and success and power. And I think that is true. I think that's the trope of the American dream. I wonder if the American dream is something that you have to start at the very bottom for.
Indeed. Where do you start? Does it exist? And what happens once you've achieved it? Joining me today, I want to introduce you the first guest, Gigi Wong. Gigi Wong is a Malaysian Chinese educator who holds workshops on anti-imperialist, disability justice, advocacy, independently and through organizations such as the Chen Project. They were born and raised in New Haven, where they continue to work as a restorative practice mentor. And you can follow Gigi on Instagram. But that's not it. Gigi is absolutely amazing. I think one of the best interviews I've ever met. And so that part of the reasons why I decided to invite her to do this presentation is hoping that she would talk for hours and hours and where I don't have to talk so much. So welcome, Gigi.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Hey, I'm so happy to see you, and thank you again for joining us on this online presentation. So I have some questions for you, Gigi. What are you doing at the moment? Because I know that you're doing a lot, right? Because you're doing I think you're building a castle, or you're kind of preparing to go into war with another country or something. What else are you doing?
So As I said, I was born and raised in New Haven. I still live and work in New Haven. I work in the same public school system that I grew up in, and I'm working as a newly created position recently as a restorative practices mentor. So what that essentially means is that I am they treat me as the last resort when I shouldn't be. The last resort for when students, to stop students from entering the school to prison pipeline by doing restorative abolitionist type work to create community both within and outside of the schools so that people have conversations and build cultural competency and understanding and a sense of community, and to create networks that students can fall back on if they're ever in trouble. So it's a very nebulous term, but I guess in 2 words, it would just be creating community.
I'm just really intrigued because you mentioned about working with students. Do they have, I'm sure they must have dreams, right? They have some kind of passion they want to pursue, what they want to be later on?
Yeah, I've asked that question before. That's one of the common questions we ask when we do these community building circles so that people can hear the stories and narratives of each other. Is like, what is your dream, or what are your bucket list items? And honestly, because being in New Haven and working in public schools, and they usually send me in what they call like the tough schools, I just view them as the most impoverished, least, cared about students. You would think they'd say, oh, career aspirations, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, an engineer, all these things that some Asian parents wish for us. But what I hear is to get out the hood, to make $1 million. And I ask them, what are you going to do with the $1 million? They don't have an answer with me. What's your bucket list? To make $1 million. They cannot think further than getting out of the bad situation they are currently in. And this is mostly my Black and brown students. But even with some of I see the differences with the white students and the more well-funded schools, even though they're in the same system. Out of the 42 schools, some of them are more well-funded, and they tend to be the ones that are closer to Yale and are more white. And the kids there give completely different answers, and it's usually career related. I want to be like my mom. I want to be a professor. I want to be a doctor. But when you go to the more urban schools, the least, like, not as well-sourced ones, it's just getting out the hood. It's just surviving the next day. Or, you get the occasional, I wish my dad wasn't shot. I wish my mom were alive. And so, I don't know. For them, I think, bringing it back to the American dream, it's a completely different dynamic. I think your dream is only as big as far as you can see down the line. And for a lot of these students, they can't see further than 2 or 3 years ahead of them.
Yeah, it's like living in multiverse, isn't it? It's like you see different types of reality all happening at the same time. But Gigi, for you, do you have a dream, like what you want to do later on?
I don't know. My dream is for these kids to actually have a dream one day, that they can have a dream that lasts longer, that is beyond survival, to the point where they can think about how they want to thrive. And some people ask me, like, why don't you move out of New Haven? Like, you went to school in the hood. When are you going to get out there? Now you're working in the hood. I'm like, I don't want to stop working there. This is my community, and these kids need somebody, and I don't want to abandon them. And my dream is for them to finally be able to break down these systems so that they can have a dream beyond, I just want to survive until the next week. Some of them, they don't know if they will, That's a lot of them. I don't know how that will work. I mean, community, there's only so much you can do with mutual aid, like in terms of giving money, but I think creating community and providing those networks of support so that I'm not doing it by myself. I think that's my dream, is to create a community where these kids can thrive, because, it breaks my heart working with them every day and then asking them what their dream is. And it's just food on the table, making it to the next week, that my dad wasn't shot, all these horrible, horrible stories. I want better stories that aren't looking backwards on changing the past, that they can actually move forward and look to thriving instead of surviving. So my dream is giving other people a dream.
Well, I actually have a snippet on about something you want to do later on, which I'll share later on. And I think it's such a meaningful and a powerful one too. But before we get to that, I want to introduce a second guest today. Joining us today is Annie Tan. Annie Tan is a special education teacher, activist, and storyteller currently working on the first book. Woo! It's a memoir on the family legacy. And his work has been featured in the New York Times, Huffington Post, New Public, Riz, and twice on NPR's The Moth Radio Hour. Follow Annie on Twitter and Instagram here by scanning the QR code. Hey, Annie, welcome.
Thank you, Hollis. That was a very generous introduction.
Strong one, too.
It's always
Annie,
weird to be introduced, but yes.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, that was it.
Yeah. No, Annie, I know you're super busy. What are you doing at the moment? Where are you today?
I am currently at school. What you see behind me is my sink in my classroom. And over here, you can see our tree of hands of my students and our staff hands.
Annie, welcome. So I know that you and Gigi are both educators at Good Ones too. And the fact that both of you work with young children a lot. I don't know. I think my question here would be when you were growing up, you kind of have this dream of what you want to be. I think everybody would have one. But I think now, being at an age, especially when you teach now, teaching these new kids, what has changed? The kids are the same, when you were young before, or I think, are they going through something so different now that their definition of dream is a totally different concept?
Yeah, I think so. I am a teacher in the New York City public school system, where I also went as a kid. I think when I was growing up, I grew up in Chinatown in Manhattan, and I didn't really know the ableism, the xenophobia that was coming at us. I didn't know that I didn't even know what the word immigrant was. And my parents were immigrants. I didn't know that word till maybe 4th or 5th grade. When we studied immigrants in school, I just thought they were white people going to Ellis Island. And I didn't really have a concept of what our place was here in America. I just knew we were kind of fresh off the boat. And it was my responsibility as a daughter to make sure my parents would survive. So it was no surprise that I went after being a teacher, which is a very stable job, but also a really good way to make a difference in kids' lives. But as I went on through the years, I just felt like I was different. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to write. I wanted to tell stories, but it felt really different from what I was supposed to do as a teacher, and to make a change in the world. And, and I didn't really understand what the stakes were against me, in terms of just how hard it is to help parents who don't know English, for instance, to be that cultural and linguistic translator for them, to juggle multiple languages and to not be fluent in Chinese and not be able to speak to my parents fluently. There's just so much in a lot of, people's histories and family backgrounds that make it hard to be able to achieve any kind of dream. And I kind of didn't know that all those things were issues. I was just like, oh, everyone has families that don't speak English. Everyone has an immigration thing. Everyone is not white, and that's what I grew up around in Chinatown. And I was really lucky to see people who looked like me so that I didn't feel like I was different, which meant I could conquer anything in a way. And I will mention a little bit more about this later in my presentation, but I also found out at 13 years old that I was related to a man named Vincent Chen, who was murdered in 1982 during this auto workers crisis in Detroit, when Japanese companies were being blamed for the loss of American jobs. And so my cousin Vincent was murdered, and his case started a Pan-Asian American movement. And that also changed my concept of who I could be in this world, and what I have become. And when you said we were artists earlier, I was like, right, I am starting to finally take that identity in as a creative and not think that I'm a stable teacher that needs to help my family. A big also thing that helped was that my parents got senior housing a few years ago, which means they have secure housing and are economically okay for the rest of their lives, which means now I can take a step back and think how much of my behaviors were driven by an economic need and how much of it was driven by me actually wanting X, Y, and Z. I want to have a relationship with my parents and I want to learn Cantonese and Toisan, but I don't necessarily have to hustle so hard anymore. And so there are a lot of things I'm unlearning in my 30s, which is exciting and kind of scary, but I feel like I'm starting to finally like know my place in the world a little bit.
That's amazing. I think that kind of understanding is kind of constant because happen today or happen in 5 years' time, and we're always kind of thinking like, what is the next step? Where am I going? Where am I heading to? And what's been happening? What am I becoming more equipped, or am I having more resource, or as well as like a strong belief? So so many things we could talk about. We're 26 minutes into our presentation, so I'm just gonna go a little faster. I have a little snippet here from Gigi that I mentioned early on. I think it's a really wonderful snippet. I really want everyone to listen to this. So let's hear it.
I'm going to library school because what I'm learning there is not like how to shelve books or how to archive things, but my particular path is in how to disseminate information, how to make sure people get the resources and the knowledge they need to pursue their goals. And I think as a society, we're very lacking in awareness of media literacy and how to consume information, even though we're consuming so much of it. But is it the quote-unquote right information, or is it the information that enriches us and allows us to think for ourselves? I don't think the answer to that is yes. So that is kind of what I'm studying. And at some point, I want to combine that knowledge with what I'm doing as a work now through like abolitionist, restorative justice, accountability work, and build a community center in New Haven.
That's amazing. And at the end of that snippet, you would actually hear Gigi's friend Dora and Sunny kind of screaming at the back, "Yeah, go Gigi, go Gigi!" It was a really exciting moment.
My biggest supporters.
Yes.
Lucky to have friends like them.
Yeah, they were amazing. They're amazing. They will be, including Gigi, they will be in episode 3 that I'm currently working on at the moment. Building a community center, kind of giving back to the local surroundings, giving back to the society. I think both Annie and Gigi, you have been kind of doing this. And I really want to thank you for the great work that you've been doing, kind of creating this positive influence. So that's kind of how I would summarize our first topic on for my presentation about the American Dream. And the second topic I really want to talk about is the identity of being an Asian American. And during my research, I discovered someone named Jess Fong. Jess Fong was born in the US and lived with her grandparents in China until she returned to the States at age 4. She received bilingual Mandarin English education and attended Johns Hopkins University, where she studied international studies and economics. Since high school, she has been active in the local Asian community, teaching classes and giving talks on education, just like Gigi and Annie, both educators, in the local Asian community, teaching classes and giving talks on education, bridging cultural gaps and parent-child relationships, drawing from her experience as a child of immigrant and a student in the NJ public schools. And this clip is about something she encountered when she was young. So let's listen to this.
Asian American. For most of my life, my identity has been anchored to these 2 words that place me at the convergence of 2 strong and vibrant cultures I was happy to call my own. But we're in a little bit of a national soul-searching trend right now, so I'll jump on the bandwagon and ask, what does it mean to be Asian American? I realized I didn't have an easy answer, so I spent several months thinking on this question, dancing around stories I did not want to remember and topics I did not want to talk about. When I was in second grade, one of my best friends sat me down on the playground during recess and told me, "Can I ask you something?" Thinking back, this was probably my first real breakup because she followed it up with, "My mom says we can't be friends anymore." I asked her why, and she said, "Because you're Chinese." I went home crying that day, and my mom explained to me how 2 Chinese and American military planes had collided midair. That week, despite beginning each morning with, "I pledge allegiance to the flag," my classmates saw me as not American, and I could not erase their association of me, an 8-year-old girl, with the scary geopolitics that permeated the news. For the first time in my life, I felt a wall thrown up over that hyphen between Asian and American. A week later, the situation de-escalated, my classmates forgot this whole thing, and we all went back to being friends at recess. But I never actually forgot that nagging feeling, that wall, nor the thought that I was not really Asian American. I was more accurately Asian in America.
What does it mean to be an Asian American? I think I was listening to this clip while I was doing research. I kind of like going back to understanding the definition, the term Asian American. And, you know, I was looking at this amazing book by Esther Kim Lee about history of Asian American theater. In it, she briefly mentioned about the term didn't exist before 1965. It was coined by an historian, and as he and other of the Asian American movement rejected these words, you would use like Oriental as racist and imperialistic. But I wonder, Gigi and Annie, when you were growing up, was there like a moment that really defined you? Was it something that you encountered when you were young that really defined you to be who you are? Because I know Annie mentioned a little bit about growing up in Chinatown and about her parents too. But Gigi, what about you? Like, what did you experience something that you thought was just so shocking growing up?
Interestingly enough, I don't think I had a specific racialized experience in school growing up the way that a lot of other students do, but I think it's primarily because I grew up in an urban environment where our school was 95% people of color and only 5% white. So if you were white, you were the odd one out, at least specific in the schools I went to. And people didn't congregate through racial lines as much as they did through class lines. So I think for me and my personal politics, I think that matters more sometimes in organizing in this community. I'm not saying in all, but where I really felt a racialized experience is my parents own a restaurant. So I had that awkward experience of being, you know, the little Asian girl running around the restaurant and everyone's just like, "Oh, isn't that cute?" Customers calling me over to try to get me to speak to them. These are like old white people. A lot of them were like doctors and professors. And I remember this one specific incident where a lot of them, sometimes they ended up being friends of my parents, asking me to like sit with them and talk with them. And like back then, I guess it was fun to be acknowledged by adults, but looking back on it, most of those experiences were wholesome, but I still do think it was racialized because it would be things like, "Oh, you know, it's so endearing, but also poor child who has to grow up in a restaurant because like their parents are immigrants." Like, this is the immigrant experience. Like, I think they fetishized my experience, and that is what made me so fascinating to them. So in the moment, I don't think it was as poignant as it is now looking back, especially the instances where they would ask me to say things or like ask about certain experiences, or just be like, "Oh, you're so different, you're so cute, like your parents are lucky to have you, oh, you're so obedient and quiet." And those are, stereotypes that people have of Asian femmes as well. So, I mean, in the moment, I don't think it was very striking. But looking back now, I think it was a little disgusting. But I don't think I had like the mind to really understand what was happening in that moment. But yeah, it wasn't from peers as it was from the adults around me. And I think that idea kind of permeates how I work with students. I don't know about you, Annie, but like I think the adult to child interaction sometimes is not as emphasized as like the peer-to-peer interaction, the way they do with bullying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like with the Asian American kids I've worked with, and I work in Sunset Park in Brooklyn now, so we have a mix of Latine and Asian students, mostly Chinese, but we also have kids from Southern Asia, India, Pakistan. And I think just me and you, like talking about being femme and Asian American, that completely shifts how I see my identity, because I think teachers were shocked to see that I spoke up so much and that I would distract students, that I was loud, that I was not just good at, although I was good at math, like they like also were like, oh, arts, music, oh.
Or like that your parents let you pursue that? Or that
right. Or like, where did you learn that? Like, I've heard from so many adults as a child, like, you are one of the loudest Asian like kids I know. Like, and I was like, what does that mean? And it means I'm supposed to be demure. I'm supposed to be quiet and submissive. That's an Asian feminine stereotype, right? And I remember watching Mulan as a kid. And I remember crying in the theater. It was the first movie, and I watched it when I was like 8. And I remember crying in the theater, being like, when Mulan was singing Reflection, who is this girl I see staring straight back at me? When will my reflection show who I am inside? Because everyone just saw me as a different person than what I was, and who I wanted to be. And I feel like it acted out a little bit and got louder because people expected me to be more quiet. I think 2 other things were that when I found out I was related to Vincent Chen, I knew from my cousin's case that if anything were to happen in some Asian country against the US, North Korea attacks, China with coronavirus, right? Then immediately the racialization of Asian Americans will switch on a dime again. And we've seen that happen with anti-Asian hate. And the third thing I realized in college, so I went to Columbia in New York City, which is on the same island in which I grew up on. I grew up with poor working class, mostly Chinese people. And then when I went to Columbia, I met people who'd been here 4 or 5 generations. I met rich Asians. I met Asians who were international. I met Asian Americans who didn't grow up with other Asian Americans. And so I found a wide array of what Asian American could be besides my own experience. And there was always this tension of people trying to find their cultures, like in like the Chinese culture club, Japanese, Korean, Filipina, people trying to find their cultures versus the political aspects of being Asian American and being in this racialized identity with like the Black Student Organization and Lucha, which was a Latine social justice organization. And so trying to find my place within that, while also knowing that everyone's in their own place in terms of finding their Asian American identity, was really fascinating and also a little bit alienating to see. Because there are all these intersections of gender and race and class that really formed who you were as an Asian American and what that meant to you.
Yeah, and I also think the Asian American identity is such a nebulous term, because Asia is such a large region. And then even within the different countries, you have the different ethnic groups or the different diaspora, even if you immigrated in a different decade, your experience can be completely different. So I think the Asian American experience can be summed up in the word like liminal spaces. We live in the in-betweens.
Right. And so, as someone who's Chinese, like I believe Chinese immigrants to America, and Chinese Americans make up one of the biggest groups in just Asian America. And so I found, like, from many friends who identify as, who are Hmong, Lao, Cambodian, they have told me like they are just consistently confused, and no one knows their history and their stories, and it makes them feel invisible in this Asian American. There's all these stereotypes that are kind of based in being Chinese or being Japanese because of our history in America with the Vietnam War, for instance, and other things. Like, there's so little that people know about different groups and with different languages, that it's, again, as you said, like Lebanon, there's so much room for it. And that, yeah.
I think in a way we can summarize this to, there's also this element of fear in it as well, because hey Sandy, hey, sorry, I love dogs. Yeah, because for us, we already for people living in America as a nation, kind of already struggling to kind of grasping this identity. But at the same time, from people who are looking from another perspective, they would often generate these opinions, these feelings that they would have, and when they see something that is so uncertain for them, they would become really, really, really strange. I mean, they would ask things like, "What are you?" This is something, again, I saw from research that I was doing, and such question it's very it's very desensitizing, it's very devaluing, and it also just creates more alienation rather than kind of building bridges for people. And I do think like identity is something that's also constantly evolving, and it's not something that is set from the beginning. A lot of external factors could change the identity, and so I was looking at some of the stats the other day. I think by 2050 there will be no single major race in the States. What happens then? Like, how do we connect with people? I think it's something that we other people should really consider. And so, just moving on to this this idea of acceptance, because we're running out of time. I can't believe we're 42 minutes already. This is crazy, but this is good. I was looking at stats the other day. Like, in 2019, there were 3 Asian hate crimes in New York City, but by 2020 there were 28. So it's kind of increased 7 times. And here, I mean, right now, because of COVID, there's this kind of connection that people, believe in this, people from China caused this, and it's kind of this hate, this kind of loathing, kind of developed here. And of course, every now and then you see on TV that there are kind of incidents, and you get reports from these hate crimes. And I just have a really, really short clip from Stephanie. Stephanie had an amazing, really bright student I met in New Haven, and this is her opinion on her personal experience on Asian hate.
I think even if it hasn't happened to you, I think the fear of it happening has been pretty tiring, I think. And I think is one of the reasons why, like, I don't know, I think I've become more of a hermit in the last 2 years, obviously because of COVID, but, hate crimes are a deterrent, definitely, of going out by yourself or late at night and kind of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Not being out is easier. Being safe at home, kind of cocooned up, is easier. And I was searching again my research, and I discovered this book, which is really good, kind of going around the full circle, which I explain later on why that is. Because in this book, it's called The Asian American Dreams by Helen. Helen also presented her personal life through this book. And it's a really interesting chapter. I strongly recommend people to read this book. It was a really interesting chapter that bridges to what Annie was talking about earlier about someone named Vincent Chen. And this chapter is about something that occurred in Detroit. And in, like what Gigi was saying about the ratio of how many white people versus how many Asian people. There was only around 7,600 Asian Americans in the 1.2 million population in Detroit. It's less than 1%. So they were minorities. And this is a brief paragraph from the book in which Helen said, in 1978, there was this new oil crisis, and price hikes at gas pumps killed the market for this heavy 8-cylinder dinosaurs made in Detroit, precipitating the massive layoffs and the crisis throughout the industrial Midwest. The Japanese auto imports were everything. The gas guzzlers were not cheap to buy, cheap to run, well-made, and dependable. They were easy to hate. Anything Japanese or presumed to be Japanese become a potential target. In a way, you can kind of relate that to Asian crimes happening now. So when you see someone who has Asian features, you assume that he or she has something to do with COVID, for example. It was like this back in 1978. And of course, there was one major incident that happened to Vincent. In 1982, a 27-year-old man named Vincent Chen was destined to become a symbol for Asian Americans. I think because Annie mentioned early on about Vincent Chen, and I don't want to talk anymore about Vincent Chen than by letting Annie talk about, because I think she knows a lot more. So Annie, I really would like you to share with us about I think history about Asian. I'm not sure if we have time to go through in this amazing story that you have for Vincent, but if you could just tell us a little bit of background about Vincent.
Yeah, I'll do my best to shorten the story with
please.
my personal story. I think we wanted to just focus in on me for this portion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see my face full screen. No, it's not. Anyway, I have told this story for the Moth, and I've told it here at Arts and Ideas actually last year. So I'm going to do a shortened version because we are running out of time. That I was this really curious kid. I was called a bot when I was a kid. That's Cantonese for really being nosy. And my parents didn't really like that. But I always wanted to know how we got to America, what kind of person I could be besides just being the kid who supports my family. And one day I happened at 13 years old upon a documentary on PBS, Becoming American, The Chinese Experience, which is perfect for me because I'm Chinese. And in the last 20 minutes of this documentary, it shows this clip of Vincent Chen, who was murdered in 1982 in Detroit for looking Japanese. The reason why there was such a fervor about his case was because he was supposed to be married the next week. And so people who formerly identified by ethnicity, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, they came together under this term, Asian American, many of them for the first time, as this term had been introduced only in the late 1960s, and this was 1982. And I just felt like a part of something, and I was like, oh, Asian American. And then I saw all these people who looked like me marching and saying, I want justice for Vincent Chen. So I felt like a part of something. And then my mom came into the living room and she pointed to the photo of Vincent Chen on the screen and said, Gogo haile buko. That is your older male cousin. And I had no idea what to say. I had so many questions, but my mom didn't even look at me. She looked completely pained and she was not going to say anything more. And I was very lucky in college that the Asian American Alliance had screened this film, Who Killed Vincent Chen, a documentary, which is airing on PBS June 20th from today. if you want to see it for yourself. And it featured heavily Vincent Chen's mother, Lily Chen, who went all over the nation. Jesse Jackson stood next to her as she stood and said, "I want justice for my son." And I had chills all over my body because she sounded just like my grandmother, but I had no idea who she was. And I still didn't know who to ask. So finally, when I started my career and in my early 20s, I took an 8-hour megabus to Detroit to try to figure out how Vincent Chin was related to me and maybe why this was so important to me. And so I met some family members. They took out like 30 photo albums. They had photos of Lily Chin and my parents with matching perms in the 1980s because that was the style back then. And so I just asked quietly, can we make a family tree? You know, I want to know how you in front of me are related to me. And so this older woman, one of my elders, has this big piece of paper, actually because they own a restaurant. It was just a piece of paper from like a leftover restaurant menu. And we started laying out that Lily Chin, Vincent Chin's mother, had 9 sisters and a brother. And my grandmother was the 4th sister on that list. So I found out Lily Chin was my second great auntie. My mother's first cousin was Vincent. And so now I knew, you know, how Vincent Chin was related to my family. And then so I asked this person who is my great auntie, one of Lily's sisters, how, like, you know, what happened after Vincent died? And this woman, my great auntie, one of my grandmother's sisters, said, well, your grandmother and we moved to Detroit 2 months after Vincent was killed. And your grandmother didn't want to learn how to drive, so she ended up moving with a family friend to New York. And she brought your mom and dad over, and that's how your family ended up in New York. And I thought about that for days and weeks and months. And I thought to myself, what would have happened had Vincent not been killed? And if he had not been killed, maybe my grandmother wouldn't have come over, maybe had not brought my parents over. And I'm the second kid. My brother is the firstborn. And there was the one-child policy at the time in China. And so I might not have been born. And as I realized that, it made me realize that life was precious, that it was okay to be curious and know all of this history, and that it was okay to fight, to know our history. You know, but it's hard being a person who was born and raised to try to go to school, get good grades, go to college, marry, and just keep my head down as a kid of immigrants, because that's been drilled into me for so long. But I have to always tell that voice, no, that is not the only way to live life. Because my cousin Vincent Chin didn't die for nothing. My great auntie Lily Chin didn't go all over the nation seeking out justice, teaching us how to be Asian Americans for nothing. And I was not born for nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Okay, thank you, Annie. Yeah, that was really deep, and I think just looking back at the journey that I've been through for the past few months, you know, I realized that something quite important is that we are all kind of connected in a way. You know, I was looking at doing all this research, and I had read about who Vincent was, and then, you know, someone from the festival of his Denise kind of said, hey, you're doing this about Asian American identities, you want to talk to Annie? And I didn't know who Annie was at the time. And then later on, when you talked to me about who Vincent Chen was and how he was related to you, then I realized it's kind of like, oh wow, it's like coming back in the full circle, like I mentioned early on. It's like everything is kind of connected in a way. And if there's so much of that we have in common, then there's no room for other things. No room for racism, no room for bigotry, no room for discrimination, alienation. And there's so much, from this project as well. Hopefully, I think everyone, hopefully you get the chance to listen to my podcast. There's so many things, so many interesting stories about other people.
Can I just add one thing, Hollis, to that?
Yeah. That
my great auntie Lily brought together like these racial solidarity coalitions that like exist today. Many, many Asian American organizations would not exist today without what my great auntie Lily did. No one would know about Vincent's case without my great auntie Lily saying it. And what Gigi's doing, fighting for restorative justice and abolition, right? That's really important for the future of us to build community. And Lily said something along the lines like, the skin's different, but the hearts are the same and the blood is the same. And we have to know that it's building community that kills that hate. And that is the only way to move forward together.
Yeah. Community is a really interesting one because here, I'm going to move forward. Oh, this is a picture of Annie and Helen.
Yes. And also, I'm sorry to interject again.
Go ahead.
The 40th anniversary of Vincent Chin's murder is this Sunday. So if you go to vincentchin.org, there's a lot of information and events, including live streams where Helen will be speaking and other things. And I will be giving a family remembrance on Sunday when that happens. Helen has been just an amazing activist on the case and just an amazing human overall, fighting for justice across the world, really.
All these resources, books, the clips, it's just, I think, for everyone to know there's so many things happening in the world. And I have my podcast. It's done. It's on my website. Again, this is called The Passage because it's to open a path for people to have deep empathy and to draw forth connections in the community. Community is a really key word here. And just hopefully, today's presentation, it was so short. I thought it was going to be like, whoa, it's going to be so long. What am I going to talk about? And I realized that with these two amazing artists, I didn't have to talk so much.
Did you think you could talk about being Asian American in just an hour, Hollis?
No. Anyway, so community is the word that I want to concentrate on. And this is another snippet from Gigi. So it's something she said about community that I thought was really significant. So let's hear the last snippet before we round up today's presentation.
More does not mean career.
No.
More means community.
Well, that's
we already do so much within the community. I feel like my job is a side note, a footnote, a way to support the community and also earn money, but that's not the satisfying part of my life.
More for the community. And like what Annie was talking earlier on about, for doing things for the community. Community kills hate. Community would actually bridge us all together. And I think wherever we are, whether I'm in Hong Kong, whether you're in New Haven or New York, wherever we are, there's always, regardless of who we are, what we're capable of, there's something that we can always do for the community. And so by concentrating on that, I think that's enough. That's enough for us to work for the rest of our lives. Yeah, and once again, thank you so much to Gigi Wong, and thank you so much to Annie Tang. Of course, and thank you to the Yale-China Association and Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in New York. Thank you so much, and also thank you to the festival for creating some wonderful presentation today. My podcast, as you can see on the right, there's 2 QR codes. It's available right now for you to scan and to listen to, like when you sleep, when you go for a run, when you're cooking in the kitchen, whenever you want. Thank you so much, everyone, today. Thank you for joining, and hopefully we'll see you again in the very near future. And this is the end of today's presentation. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Hollis.
Thank you.
Great work.